now, though. Should you give money to a homeless person? I'm pleased to say we are joined by Ish Camp, who oversees an outreach team for St Mungo's, the homeless charity, and works regularly with rough sleepers. And we're also asking this as, of course, the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis in the UK means that more and more people are facing homelessness. In London alone, we know over 4,000 people were counted sleeping on the streets at the end of last year, prompting warnings of a humanitarian crisis which is only expected to get worse. Ish, we're going to come to you in a moment. We know your experience is invaluable in this, but Wilfred, obviously it's a difficult situation for anyone to be in, but would you give money directly from your pocket to a rough sleeper?
I wouldn't. And I think that what's really interesting is that even if there are people who wanted to give cash, it's almost impossible. Because actually, how many people really carry cash with them these days? I mean, I don't, for example. So the whole idea that you're able to give cash, I think that is not going to happen anymore. But one of the things that I would do is that I would give food. And I've got a shop and I have a lot of people coming in and telling me their stories. And I won't give money, but I will give them food. Because you're right, you never know how people end up in the situation that they do in terms of being on the streets. And all you need to have happen in your life is just a series of very few unfortunate incidents, which then means you end up being homeless. But I believe that in this country, if you truly want to be given a chance and you truly do not want to be on the road, there are charities, there are facilities that are there to help you.
What's your concern about handing cash over? Because, OK, we're cashless, mostly cashless now, but in the past, it's been very simple to give somebody a fiver.
Yeah, it's drugs. You're just that. It's either drugs or alcohol. So what you don't want to do is that you don't want to be facilitating something that is actually contributing to people destroying their lives.
That's a massive assumption, though, isn't it?
But most people are. You know, if somebody, if you have the choice,
that's a huge generalisation.
No, it's not true. If somebody says to me, well, I said, I won't give you money, but I will give you food, but they'll walk away because they don't want the food. What they want is they want the money to go and buy the drug. There's no assumption in that. That's my sort of experience.
Daisy, tell me your experience. Have you handed money straight over?
I have. And funnily enough, when I was thinking about this subject, of course, my reaction was, I do. Actually, as Wilfred quite rightly said, I used to. I'm now like most other people. I don't carry money around most of the time. And also you have that thing of scrabbling around trying to find something. But I am a soft touch and I know that I'm not meant to give money. In the same way that Wilfred said, you know, all the advice is give money to a charity, don't give it direct. But I live in an area in northwest London which has got worse and worse, like so many areas. You know, in my daily walk back and forth from the tube, I probably pass 10 people sleeping rough on one high street. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And I know most of them. I look out for them. If I don't see them, I worry and think, where are you? Why aren't you there? And I have contacted charities in the past. I think, again, Wilfred's assumption about drugs is borne out by some of the statistics. Some of the figures and stats show that the majority, perhaps even 80%, do have a drug problem. But that's not always why they're on the streets. You know, these things can be a vicious circle. And it's the politicians who are to blame. You know, politicians will not take long-term choices and decisions. The long-term choice that they've all been facing for the last 40 years is build more houses, and they've failed to do it.
Which is exactly what we came off from Storm's chat there about housing and about how that's allocated. I mean, as I say, your experience is not just as someone who's an outreach worker with St Mungo's, but also your experience of homelessness, not necessarily on the street. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of women, homelessness is hidden. We know from the data that's collected, it's from street population. It's very dangerous for women to live on the streets, as it is for anybody. I think when thinking about should you give money to a human being, which is what rough sleepers are, is thinking about why do you want to give that money? Do you want to give that money because you're seeing another human being in the worst possible position that you can imagine yourself being in, and for a few minutes or hours you want to give them some temporary comfort in way of a couple of quid? Fill your boots if you do. Yeah. But if actually you're really concerned about where that money might be spent, and I understand what Wilfred's saying, people are concerned about that, then direct it to a charity like St Mungo's that's regulated and you can see how your money's spent. I think what's important to remember is, speaking with the thousands and thousands of rough sleepers that I've worked with over my career, when I ask people what's the pivotal moment that helped you in your homelessness recovery, it's very rarely someone gave me £2 outside Tesco's.
Yeah.
It's normally I had a really valuable human connection with somebody, someone showed me kindness and care,
and that's
free.
That's the difficult thing, isn't it? Because we're talking about giving food. Like, what is it that somebody who's in that situation, that's on the street, actually needs from a stranger that they might come into contact with?
This is the important point. Everyone is different, and we need to stop thinking of homeless person.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their own story. We know from the data yesterday that over half of the people on the street right now have lost their home in the last 90 days. Some of them lost their home this morning. There are people out now, someone shut their front door for the last time this morning, and they may have been at work last week, leading a very normal life like you and I. So there are preconceived ideas that all homeless people...
And one of the things, and I would love your view on this, that I was always told to do, and I try very hard, and I know this literally costs nothing, is don't turn your cheek, don't look the other way. If somebody has said something to you, at least give them respect to make eye contact, say, I'm very sorry, I'm not going to give you some money, but I hope you're all right. Or even a smile, because one of the things that I think people say frequently is they just feel ignored and invisible. And I mean, people sleeping on the streets. And actually, even a smile will make them, because I always worry, we always have that squeamishness. I'm so sorry, I don't want to look. I'm ashamed that I'm not giving you money. I feel sorry for you and I feel embarrassed. And therefore, I'm just going to look the other way and walk the other way. And actually, I do now try to say, are you okay? Or, hello.
OK, well, we're going to take loads of calls coming in. So let's hear from Peter in London. Tell us about your experience, Peter.
Yes, well, actually, I was homeless about 15 years ago, and the reaction I got from some of the professional services was, oh, you're far too posh to be homeless. And this is where I would agree with the lady in the blue, whereas I appreciated so much that cup of tea and the hot dog. But would I give cash? Maybe not, because you don't know where that's going. It could be to perhaps fuel a habit or an addiction, which I wouldn't want to be a part of.
So, Peter,
however,
your experience... Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, so however, I would give a cup of tea or to a charity, because having been on the street, and I think anybody now, it's not a classist thing. It can happen to anybody at any point.
Isn't the feeling, though, Peter and Ish, that if you are giving something other than money, built into that is a judgment on that person's... So rather than making contact in the way you're talking about, Daisy, what you're actually saying is, I don't trust you. Actually, I don't trust you to use this money the right way.
Well, in a sense, yes, I suppose, because you don't know quite where that's going. And I wouldn't want to, perhaps fuel any habit, although I suppose... if I saw someone really desperate, I might actually do it. It's a really difficult question, right. But I would have, I did appreciate the help they gave me, and I think the problem we're going to get now is there's going to be so much more homeless people that it's shocking. So I think I wouldn't give cash, but I will give food.
Can I just come in here, basically? Because what we cannot do is take responsibility for what's happened to these people. Because eventually, whatever circumstances these people find themselves in, they need to take personal responsibility to come out of it. You don't think you're going to be there to help change people's lives. We could be sympathetic, but don't think being sympathetic is going to help that person change. But
you talk about personal responsibility. Isn't that missing the point that a lot of this is about luck? People have bad luck in their lives.
I don't... Well, some of it...
we don't live in a meritocracy. Some people just have bad luck.
Some
Illness,
people just have...
bad relationships.
Some people do. But one of the things I always find staggering is why is it, for example, someone could be a drug addict or an alcoholic for 20, 30 years and then suddenly they change. That is what I'm interested in. What is it? They could have had all the services given to them, but there was something that changed within them, some form of responsibility.
But Matt, sorry, I was just going to say, on Wilfred's point, I don't know if Peter's still on the line, but I would love to hear how and why Peter managed to turn it around. What was the catalyst for you?
Well, what it was for me, because all my parents and my family weren't alive, and I suffered with serious mental health, things just sort of went awry. But what turned it for me was I was taken in. I found a hostel that helped me, run by nuns, funnily enough, and I was determined to get back and get a job with live-in accommodation. And that's how I managed to turn my life around.
Fascinating.
But it was a struggle.
Once you get a stable platform, then things can change. But that is...
Well, it can do. I don't think we should assume that all these things are going to...
I think it's more than that. I think what it is human connection, and I think that's what Peter's describing on the call. So to answer your earlier question of why does it sometimes take 20 years, maybe they've not had that right human interaction with somebody.
And they need to find somebody.
Or they may have had it, but it wasn't the right time for them to change. I think the whole thing about change is that people need to be ready for it. You can't just think by giving, they're suddenly going to help them change. They've got to be ready for it.
But I guess charities like St Mungo's are the experts in navigating people getting ready for that.
I want to take, we've got so many calls coming in. Kerry's in Hull. Is it right to give money directly to someone that you see that's homeless?
So I run a homeless charity and outreach in Hull and in East Riding. We are really small. But one of the things that we would always say is to try and not give money. When people are given food and drink, maybe just to even ask the person what food and drink that they actually like. And I think just taking time, everybody's got just a little bit of time that they could give to sit and listen and speak to people and break down those barriers between kind of what's going on. From personal experience, I think people are more appreciative of when you will just sit and listen to them and treat them as any other human being.
So that's really interesting, because I think a lot of people, they might buy something and hand it to somebody to eat, but actually that's ignoring the fact that maybe not something they eat because of their background or beliefs or whatever. But you're saying take an interest and then be led by their choices, and that's a different type of connection?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people just want somebody to acknowledge them. It's not pleasant, it's not a great environment, especially for the women on the streets. But I think as well, sometimes you see people say, oh, they threw that piece of food that I bought them. But if you actually taken the time to ask them what they like, we go into a shop and choose what we want. Homeless people have the same choices. It seems to be let's give them a bag of sausage rolls and a cup of coffee. But that person might be a vegetarian. So if you don't take the time to ask, then you're never going to know how you can actually help them at that time.
OK, listen, thank you so much, Kerry. We're going to move on. Anne-Marie's in Staffordshire. Anne-Marie, would you ever hand somebody cash in the street if you can see they're clearly sleeping rough?
I would gladly give people money for many reasons, because the thought of not having money is beyond belief. And if a genuine person is homeless and they've got no money to buy somebody a card or anything, just having the thought of knowing that you can go in a shop and still buy a card for your friend, that's good. So when you give people money, sometimes it's for a good purpose. It's not always bad things.
And, I can only imagine if you're homeless, one of the things you must lose, Ish, is a sense of agency, that you can actually make your own choices. It feels like too many choices are being made for you.
Absolutely. I think anyone can recognise that someone on the street, the one thing they don't have is choice, contrary to some unpopular beliefs. But again, it's important to recognise that just because somebody is turning down food, perhaps you're in London where we are overwhelmed with free food in London for people that are rough sleeping. So it doesn't necessarily mean they want to use it on drugs.
That's interesting, because you're being donated so much food.
Yeah, London is one of the most sort of bountiful areas for getting free food in the country. So it might be that they don't need that in that moment.
But the question is that you're saying, well, do they have choice? Because I think we have a country where if you really do not want to be homeless, do you have the choice where you can actually find accommodation? Because if you have that choice and decide not to, well, why are we then responsible for the choice that person has made?
I think it's important to recognise that members of the public are not responsible for solving rough sleeping. That doesn't lay with us. But I think I would absolutely say it's not about necessarily just having a choice. It's important to have access to Wi-Fi, to go on viewings. It's important to have an income. To have an income, you need a bank account. To have a bank account, you need ID. Lots of people that we're finding on the streets haven't got this ready to hand. And I'm sure from the thousands of people that I speak to, they would prefer to be somewhere safe at night.
And what type of person are you tending to be helping? Obviously, we know that there are a lot more men rough sleeping than women, because women simply can't put themselves in that position. And even the men are getting, abused and urinated on, and from all these statistics today, absolutely horrendous. But traditionally, we tended to think of like teenage runaways ending up on the streets, particularly going to sort of seaside towns and stuff. That always seemed to be one of the main pull factors for them. And then obviously there was a lot of stories recently about veterans who were being let down by the armed forces as they left. And is that still the case?
I mean, so to answer
dated?
the question, who we work with are human beings and everyone's different. So absolutely, some people use substances, but the people of all different ages, over half of the people on the streets are new to the streets. There's all different demographics that we deal with. And
I was just wondering if there's been any progress on teenagers or veterans, or if are they still significant
certainly
number?
Younger people, especially coming out of the care system, are that there's a link between that and rough sleeping for sure.
I want to keep taking calls because we're getting so many. Keith's in Pembrokeshire. Keith, would you give cash directly to someone that was clearly sleeping rough?
No, I wouldn't, is my answer to that particular part of the question. But secondly, I'd like to say, if I may, back in 1974, I deliberately made myself homeless because of circumstances at the time. And I simply, I was training to become a psychiatric nurse, and I lost my partner. And I managed to get through the training, but once I qualified, I decided I needed to clear my head and get out and about. So I packed up everything and I took to the streets, and I simply called myself a gentleman of the roads. And I did it from May until September of 1974. But I knew at the end of that time I'd need to get a life together. So I just simply walked the streets. But I wasn't penniless. I wasn't struggling by any means because I organised myself. But if I went into a chippy for lunch or a cafeteria or something, it was in the streets of Cardiff. And somebody was sitting outside begging. I wouldn't give them any cash, but I'd actually take them in for a meal with me, sit there chit-chatting and one thing another, and wish them all the best when we finished, and off I went. And I did that quite a few times over that 6-month period.
I mean, your homelessness, Keith, feels like it's quite distinct. I mean, it's a distinct choice that you've made, but clearly you've been able to be a friend to a lot of people who were in genuine need.
No, I deliberately made myself homeless. I gave up my flat and everything, and it was all planned. But I needed time out. I needed to get my head clear because I knew I wanted to settle down into my profession, and I needed to go with a clear mind. But if I may mention one small thing, and I'm not here to upset anybody, so please don't jump down my throat, is that a few weeks ago, Suella Braverman mentioned that people are homeless by choice, and a lot of people got angry with her. What I'd like to say is, for 4 years of my career in the early days, I worked in a drug and alcohol unit, and I worked with many people that were homeless that came in for treatment and one thing or another. And during conversation and discussion with them, there were quite a high percentage of people that deliberately did make themselves homeless.
Okay.
They weren't asked to leave. They weren't kicked out by parents or anything like that. They chose to leave.
Okay, Keith, I
and
just
that
want
was
to
a
turn,
lifestyle choice.
I want to turn to Ish and ask how representative that is, what Keith's saying.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And I'm sorry to hear that you went through a difficult time and made that decision in your life. I think you're right. I think a lot of people, what you're talking about is people with drug and alcohol support needs. And to fund that lifestyle, it costs money. And actually keeping an accommodation over your head, particularly here in the UK, is expensive. So people will give up accommodation.
Is that fair to call that a choice?
I would argue, working for St Mungo's, that it's not a choice, it's an addiction. But yeah, some people may argue otherwise.
And the Suella Braverman thing where she said that it was a lifestyle choice. And one of the things she was talking about was she was criticising, if I remember rightly, charities who give out tents. And she was sort of saying that these charities are creating a tent city and that's unwelcome and should stop. What's the truth of it?
I mean, it's unsafe to be on the street whether you're in a tent or not. So I would not advocate handing out tents. I would advocate to try and get people into safe and warm accommodation wherever possible.
Yeah.
I think it's just the word lifestyle choice. I mean, sometimes people feel that's the only choice they have. So that's what I'm arguing, is that we have a system to say, if you really want to change, this is what we could do to support you. But I would absolutely still hold the line that a lot of people are not ready to change, and therefore there's nothing we could do until they've decided they want to change.
I think one of the barriers is trying to access that support right now is very difficult. There's been a lot of cuts to support services around those needs. So actually, we experience people on a daily basis that are ready to change, but they're waiting in line. And in that time, they're going to fall off. So we're kind of there to pick them up when that happens.
Team, thank you so much, Ish, and thank you, team. Thank you, Keith, and all our callers. We have to say, if you're worried about someone who is sleeping rough or is homeless, there are a couple of things you can do. You can call StreetLink. That's the National Rough Sleeper Referral Line. You can alert local services to people who are sleeping rough, tell an outreach team, and local authorities and other homelessness organisations where you've seen someone sleeping rough. StreetLink will connect people experiencing homelessness with local support available to them, and the number is hopefully on your screens right now. 0500 0800 0500 0914. There we go. 0300 500 0914. Excuse the mistake. If you believe the individual requires emergency medical attention for their mental or physical health, don't hesitate. Call 999 for an ambulance or for the police.